and welcome to the Axiom Medical COVID-19 Vaccine Facts versus Fiction live stream that we're hosting today. Just a quick background. My name is Holly Foxworth, and I am one of the registered nurses. I'm also the marketing manager for content here at Axiom in case you've stumbled upon our feed or you're new and you're not familiar with who we are. But as always, I do have a brilliant team, the best minds in medicine and communication, both that are going to be joining our panel today. We have Dr. Scott Cherry, who's our Chief Medical Officer. We also have Dr. Peter Matos. We have Chief Marketing Officer, Dara Wheeler, and then also Communications Director, Autumn Brennan. So they're going to walk us through some of those most recent myths that have been floating around, whether that be on TV, on social, etc., and kind of give us the accurate information of what goes along with those. So before I introduce our panel and have them kind of talk a little bit about themselves, I did want to bring something to your attention. I want you to circle this Thursday, which is going to be the 10th, on your calendars, because this is going to be a great event that we're hosting. It's about the mass shootings and safe survival, especially in those workplaces. And so we're going to be providing the education, not only to identifying some of the risk factors that would be associated with that, but also what steps that you need to take to prevent these workplaces. I think there's really two things that have really stood out recently, especially to me, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. But the first one being that everybody always thinks it will never happen to them. You know, I live in a small state, I have a small city, we're really safe, etc. Unfortunately, those are the ones that sometimes find themselves in these types of challenging situations. So that's the first piece. The second piece is that the recent event that had occurred in the transportation organization recently, I was really impressed whenever I heard their employees speak, and they gave some of the media interviews, and what they said was, we were prepared for this. You know, you're never fully prepared for a scenario that occurs, but their leaders had really taken the time to think through what could happen, what potentially could happen, never thinking that it would actually occur, but they thought that through in the very beginning. They did drills, they taught their employees, and so that they credited that with the outcome that was achieved there. So I think it's going to be excellent. We're going to have multiple different sources that are coming in, contributors, and it'll be great information. So please, if you haven't already, I want you to register for that. And so you can do that by either looking in the description box that is here for our live stream. There's a link there. We also have it posted to our social channels and then also on email. So again, that's going to be this Thursday at 1:00 p.m. Central. And you do need to register for that. So I think those are the kind of the highlights that I wanted to kind of go through. Let's go ahead and meet the panel, and we'll go through each of them, let them introduce themselves, kind of tell us a little bit about who they are and their background, and then we'll get started with the main content. Dr. Cherry, would you like to go first?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Scott Cherry. I'm a board-certified preventive medicine and public health physician. I've been supporting corporate, military, and industrial operations for the past 15 years, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. Thank you. And how about you, Dr. Matos? You want to go next?
Yep. So Dr. Cherry and I both trained together at Walter Reed, and I am trained identical to Dr. Cherry, and I've been supporting clients in every sector of the economy for COVID since last March. Previous to that, a lot of work with the military industrial base and occupational medicine.
Awesome. Thank you. And Dara, we'll have you go next.
Thank you, Holly. I'm very happy to be here. My name's Dara Wheeler. I'm Axiom's Chief Marketing Officer, the less exciting CMO. And I'm here to talk a little bit more about the myths of the vaccine. Excited to be here. Thanks, Holly.
Fantastic. And then Autumn?
Thanks, Holly. I've spent the last 25 years as a holistic health and wellness coach, empowering people with natural medicine and lifestyle options. I'm also excited to be here because the World Health Organization now ranks vaccine hesitancy as the top 10 threats to global health.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's go ahead and get started then. Kind of before we get into some of the myths that are here, I did want to touch base with you, Dr. Cherry, and just kind of ask, could you give us an update in terms of where we stand currently within the nation in terms of vaccination?
Sure. You know, within the U.S., I believe we're up to about 42% of the population being fully vaccinated. So when you look at the country being about 350 to 360 million people, that's about 140 million people fully vaccinated. And, you know, many of the vaccines require 2 doses. So really, there's actually been 300 million doses given throughout the U.S. to date. And so you have a mix of fully vaccinated and partially vaccinated. So about half of the country, so to speak.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and we'll kind of go into some of the herd immunity, et cetera, towards the end. But Dr. Matos, talk to us about why this conversation matters, what the significance would be between fact versus fiction, and why it would be that it's important for people to really kind of get that accurate information and use that ever powerful word, why, whenever they hear statements that would be specific to their health or myths there.
So I think the misinformation is very, very sophisticated. And I think even professionals, doctors and nurses can get duped into believing something. You know, good misinformation is 90% fact and 10% spin, but that 10% spin can really make a person hesitant. And JAMA, actually, the Journal of the American Medical Association, there was an article that came out yesterday specifically looking at misinformation on social media and how that has affected vaccination rates in different areas. So I think it's really important that people be good consumers of medicine as to where they get their vaccine facts. And just know that, you know, somebody on YouTube that's saying, I'm a physician, check their name out. Notice that they're not board certified. Notice that they're not an infectious disease or public health expert. Pay attention to those things. Just because someone says they're an expert doesn't mean they are. So make sure you vet your information properly and go to trusted sources and talk with your own personal physician too about vaccines.
Good. Yeah, I was going to ask you specifically. So is that what your recommendation would be, that if you have a question specific to whether vaccines would be appropriate for you, that you would follow up with your primary care physician?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some sites that I think do a really good job are Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, otherwise known as CHOP. I think they have a fabulous risk communications team there, and they do a really good job of monitoring social media. And then they try to come out with a video with an expert to explain, or, you know, to basically bust the myth. The other sites that I like are the American College of Rheumatology. If you are immune compromised, I think they've got good statements for folks that might be on immunosuppressive drugs. And then the other one, if you're pregnant, thinking of getting pregnant, or, you know, lactating, I think the American College of Gynecology is another good source for fertility, pregnancy, and for breastfeeding moms. I think those are my, you know, go-to sources for trusted information on vaccines when it comes to those populations.
Yeah, definitely. Good information. Thank you for that. Well, the first one I wanted to kind of jump into here was the one that seems to be most popular, especially this last week, that was specific to the vaccine magnet challenge. So maybe if we could have Dara and Dr. Cherry, maybe one of you explain kind of what that myth was that goes into it, and then kind of give us the facts behind that of why or why not that is accurate.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about what I've heard or seen. And there was a bunch of videos and pictures going around social media and the internet, videos of people post-vaccination putting a magnet on their arm at the vaccine site and showing that the magnet stuck after the vaccine. And so people are saying that we're being injected with all sorts of metals and it's causing this magnetic reaction. And so there's been a lot of videos and social media campaigns around this, and both people supporting the myth, and then a lot of docs and people trying to come out and say, hold on a second, this is a myth. So Dr. Cherry, I don't know if you want to go in a little bit about what the myth is and what the busting of it is.
Yeah, you know, this is something I didn't think I would actually have to address in my career, actually. But what I try to really focus on in our public announcements is a lot with what Dr. Matos addressed, where because there's so much amount of information now available to us through so many different venues, you really have to be disciplined in the type of information you allow for yourself to be consuming, kind of analogous to, I guess, our nutrition and food intake, where at some point in the evolution of humankind, where there ended up becoming too much, or food became plentiful. So we actually had to be very selective. And so that's how I actually have addressed information for COVID for myself, and then for my friends, family, and then for the content that we use at Axiom, is that you really actually have to exercise very intense discipline to use only approved or valid sources. If you're getting a story with your facts, it may be misleading, and so you really want to focus on factual information that doesn't have a narrative. And I think Dr. Matos's recommendations, he gave those to me a while back, and those have been mine, and so I really appreciate that. And I think having really a good relationship with your personal primary care physician is absolutely key, because an expert that you have a relationship with and that you can trust can help you understand what to not pay attention to or what to discredit, because there is just so much out there. And I think this is a perfect example. These vaccines, although I think a lot of people feel like they've been rushed, have gone through all the due diligence that the FDA requires to meet emergency use authorization, and they're being created in facilities that are licensed to perform medical manufacturing, medicine manufacturing. And so really there's no concern in my mind of having microchips or metals that I think people are there's some I think trending in social media or news where there's potential magnetism or metals that are in the vaccine. So I find that largely discredited, and it's really interesting to kind of address as a professional. But really, I would say that there's not an issue with magnets and your vaccine. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, great information. And actually, you bring up the issue of microchips, and that was one of the next ones that we wanted to kind of touch on here. And so, I'll kind of go to Autumn and Dr. Matos there. Talk to us about this issue of the vaccines containing some type of microchip, and whether that's actually being inserted whenever you're getting the vaccine.
Absolutely. So in social media, I believe it started on Reddit, there was an image of a syringe with a tiny little microchip on it. And the little story behind it was about that this is what they're putting inside of you, when really that microchip was designed by Columbia University engineers, and it was circling in connection with all of this, and that it was attached somehow to the COVID-19 vaccine. And that microchip actually is still being tested on animals. It has nothing to do with vaccines whatsoever, but it was one image that just had a lot of mileage on it. And we know that it would take a very different implement to insert a microchip, not the cute little needles that they use to deliver the vaccine today. So it actually has nothing to do with vaccines at all, and it's not even for use in human form right now.
Yeah. So Dr. Matos, was there anything that you wanted to add to that in terms of maybe kind of where some of this originated from, or what maybe that we would want the employers to be able to convey to employees that would maybe be considering the vaccine but had this type of concern?
Yeah, so I think, you can look at what the ingredients are in the vaccine, and I think there's no metal in the vaccine at all. And kind of going off of what we were talking about before with the magnet challenge, remember, when we go and get an MRI, right, our bodies already have some level of, of metals in us, right, elements. That's why you do an MRI, correct? And so I think if you think this through and rationalize this and get beyond the clickbait or, whatever video they're trying to show you, break it down. What are in these vaccines? What do we know about the human body already? And what do we know about the use of, current technology like MRIs and those type of things? I think just before we started, we were talking and there was a video of someone that put a coin on their arm and said, guess what? I didn't get the vaccine. So, there's an example, right? So try it when you're not vaccinated. It didn't work on my vaccinated arm or my unvaccinated arm. So it just depends, right, on what your nutrition is and what, natural metals you might be getting from the food you're eating.
All right, good stuff. All right, Dr. Cherry, I'll come to you with the next one then here. And that was the claim that we're hearing that if you get the vaccine, that actually is going to make you have COVID as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one is a good one. I think it's probably a reasonable expectation or concern. As viruses have evolved over the past, many decades, the original vaccines did have a component of the infectious disease with it. And so they're called live virus vaccines. And so there is a potential in those that would actually create a potential risk, small, but potential risk of being infected. With the COVID vaccines, they actually do not have any active component of the virus. And so really there's no risk of infection. Two of them, actually utilize messenger RNA technology, which we may talk about later. But again, there's really no risk of getting it because you're not getting any component of a live virus.
Good information. Yeah. All right, Dara, I'll come to you with the next one, which was specific to side effects. It does feel like that whenever that initial pause was given for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, that it was like all of a sudden everyone was very attuned and alerted to potential side effects that, especially when it occurred with the Johnson & Johnson, they're now giving those again. But are you seeing that there has been significant side effects or anything that you've experienced yourself that should be of concern?
Yeah, we're hearing a lot about side effects, and people are almost on social media making it a little bit of a game of comparing side effects or theorizing about side effects. But what we're seeing, and we're running a lot of vaccine clinics ourselves, and so we're seeing a lot of the direct access to people that are vaccinated, and we have seen that, like any vaccine, it can cause mild side effects such as low-grade fever, pain, or redness at the injection site, but majority of the reactions are mild and go away within just a few days. Very rarely are there any long-term or serious side effects, and we do track that very carefully and track any sort of adverse reactions to the vaccine, and not seeing very many of that. But what I also recommend, as we've mentioned before, Dr. Mato said this and others have said this, if you're ever concerned about your current health and whether you should get the vaccine, you should always talk to your physician about that. Or like Dr. Mato said, if you're immunocompromised or have other concerns, then that should be a component of what you evaluate in the risk in getting a vaccine. But in general, the risk of a side effect in this vaccine is very low.
Great, thank you. Dr. Matos, I'm going to come to you next. And so I have to kind of admit that I never really understood this next one that we're going to go through. And so maybe you can kind of help us understand maybe where this came from or where there would be any type of relation back. But talk to us about this idea that if you get the vaccines, then that's actually going to change your DNA.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is to understand there's kind of three types of vaccines around the world. So, and the way I like to think of them is they're all delivery systems, right? So there's the mRNA vaccines, and the mRNA is like somebody reading you a brownie recipe, right? So the mRNA reads it. And then you have the adenovirus, and maybe the adenovirus is you watch a video. And then the other one is, the inactivated vaccine, which is the Sinovac vaccine from China. And maybe your mom's telling you the recipe over the phone. The bottom line is you're receiving the information to make brownies, except in this instance, we're not making brownies. We're trying to get your immune system to respond and make immune memory cells to protect you against COVID. So the mRNA, the adenovirus, and the inactivated spike protein are all delivery systems. The way I like to think of it is, if I'm going to send a package, I could send it FedEx, UPS, or US Postal Service, right? theoretically, if I'm sending, my Google Pixel buds, I could use any of those 3 delivery services and they would get there, except maybe USPS these days. But right, so the reality is they're just delivery systems, and these technologies have been around for a very, very long time. I think that's the other thing, is that there's this sense that these technologies were quickly developed. Not true at all. Adenovirus, I worked on adenovirus 30 years ago when I was an undergrad. In college, mRNA technology's probably been around for 20, 25 years on a large scale level. And there were already different pharmaceuticals working on coronavirus vaccines from the original outbreak of SARS-1 in 2003.
Wow. Okay. And then Dr. Cherry, I'll come to you with one that's very similar, and that one was specific to this messenger RNA technology that we've been talking about, and whether that, the vaccination process and that approval was actually rushed.
Correct. I think this is a common concern because, previous to COVID, it took a number of years for a therapeutic to go through the FDA approval process. And, fortunately with Project Warp Speed, a lot of the time a lot of the time challenges for that 2 to 3 year period were reduced by having teams already set up and waiting for these applications to be reviewed, having networks already created for the clinical trials. But specifically about messenger RNA technology, just as Dr. Matos had said, this has been out for at least 20 years that I've been tracking, and it's a very elegant way to create a vaccine that's very specific to a certain need. So, the vaccine is actually priming our immune system to be aware of the primary infectious mechanism that the coronavirus utilizes, which is the spike protein. And so, again, messenger RNA is kind of this copy or recipe, as Dr. Matos talked about, and it's very temporary, it's frail, and so once it's utilized, it's discarded. So it's not like your grandmother's coveted recipe book, but it's really just a quick node working copy of the recipe, and it's quickly discarded. And so again, this is not new technology, and it has gone through all the relevant safety and approval and oversight components that are needed by the FDA.
Yeah. So just kind of to clarify that, so I think what I'm hearing you say is that even though there was a short time period for the development and implementation, kind of where we made that vaccine available to people, that doesn't reflect that there were steps that were cut out of the normal process, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right, good deal. All right, Dr. Matos, we're going to come back to you. I think this one, we're going to go to the one about the controversial substances. This one's definitely raised some eyebrows. Is there any truth to vaccines containing controversial substances? And are you aware of where this may have came from or what they may be relating to?
Yeah, so I think there's some misunderstanding, specifically the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. There was some information that came out from various contradicting information from different Catholic archdioceses initially, and then also some other, there was a religious, basically objection to J&J. The misinformation was that there were fetal components, cells used to make the J&J vaccine. That is false. What is true is, remember, I go back to that beginning, 90%, factual, 10% spin. There's something called, there are 293 cells. They were from, we don't know, some type of either, we don't know whether it was an aborted fetus or it was a miscarriage. There were fetal cells from 1972 in, I believe it was Denmark or the Netherlands, that they immortalized, and these cell lines are propagated again and again. You can actually order these cell lines from what's called ATCC, American Type Culture, and then there's a European equivalent. But it was one time thing that they took that tissue and they kept propagating the same tissue from 1972. So what these cells are used for a lot of times actually are to test a vaccine, to test how well the vaccine works in our system. And that's been standard. When I did research, I think I was doing research on an adenoviral vaccine, going back 25 years before I went to medical school. And we use these cells to kind of test the expression of the vaccine. Does it work? So yes, there were immortalized fetal tissue cells from 1972 that were used in J&J to verify that the vaccine worked. That is true. So some people might say, I'm comfortable with that, but if you have a religious objection, I would say, talk about that with, your priest, your rabbi, your mullah, whoever, and, decide if you're comfortable doing that. And if not, what I've advised folks then, get the mRNA vaccines, right? They were done in a different way and they did not use those cells. So I think that's where some of the confusion came in, specifically with J&J and the fetal components.
Okay, yeah, good information. All right, Adam, let's head in your direction. We've got one more here that's a myth, and then we're going to cover two more things, and then we'll kind of wrap things down. Talk to us about if somebody has already had COVID-19, do they still need to be vaccinated?
Absolutely. Due to the severe health risks associated with COVID-19, it's important to get the vaccine no matter what, right? And there's just more research that needs to be done. I had COVID back in March of 2020, and at that time, the best guess on that window of immunity of reinfection was right around 2 years. They're like, oh, you've had it, you're good for 2 years. Well, that's been proven wrong again and again. And there's just not enough information currently available to say if or how long people are protected from it after they've had COVID. So early evidence suggested that natural immunity may not last very long, but more studies need to happen in order to get solid evidence. So when in doubt, cover yourself, make sure that you get vaccinated.
Good points. Yeah. All right. So let's see. I'm going to go back to Dr. Cherry and Dr. Matos and talk to us a little bit about herd immunity and why is it that maybe you can kind of explain what herd immunity is and then talk to us about why we may be hearing different things based on the type of media that you're listening to. You may hear on CNN one day that we're at this percentage versus, Fox is the next day and we're saying something else. So what is this and what is it, what's accurate? What can you believe?
Mm-hmm. Well, I can start off a little bit and provide some context. Herd immunity is a well-established kind of phenomenon where once a population has a certain level of immunity to an infectious agent, then the small proportion that maybe is not immune through either vaccination or natural infection actually gets a huge benefit of not being susceptible to disease, because essentially you could think of it as a bunch of zebras kind of on an African landscape. And so say a sick or slower running zebra is in the middle of the pack. If there's any predators looking at the pack, it essentially protects them. And so if you take it more to the medical model, those that are immune, say there's 100 people and 80 or 90 of them are immune, that means the 10 that may be interspersed in that crowd won't be exposed to it because they basically have this protective effect of that larger population. And I think there's a lot of discussion about what level of herd immunity will be needed for COVID-19. And the way I understand it, but would want Dr. Matos' opinion, is the way I've seen it is, the level of percentage to make herd immunity is a function of kind of the infectiousness of the infectious disease, or the R naught, so to speak, the reproductive number, which is kind of like if someone's infected, how many other people could they potentially infect during that life cycle? And I think most diseases fall between like 60 and 80%. But I was just curious if Dr. Matos has had kind of any thoughts about where he's landed from his work on this in infectious disease.
Yeah, I would say, I always say a pandemic is a living, breathing thing. We never know at any one time what the R naught is, which variant do we have, right? And which vaccine do I have? So I think rather than focusing on herd immunity, you're at herd immunity when you have decreasing cases, decreasing hospitalizations, decreasing positivity rates for COVID tests. And, and then of course, if you have all of those, you're not going to have many deaths or hospitalizations. So I think if you look at what the outcome of herd immunity is, that's almost a better way to think of it rather than being, set on a particular number. But Dr. Cherry's right. I agree. I think, if you read all the different experts in that, it's in that 60 to 80% range, and things that affect that number going lower would be more effective vaccines. Check, we have that. Things that affect that number being higher towards that 80% would be if we have some type of super variant, like an escape variant or something along those lines, then you're going to have a higher number. So I think it's kind of looking at all of the pieces. It's not like this magical number that it's perfect. Again, a pandemic's a living, breathing thing that's affected by the particular COVID variant. And then how does that variant do against your vaccines? Those are the two main components that'll determine what that number is for herd immunity. And again, herd immunity, you're going to see decreasing cases, hospitalizations, and positivity rate for COVID.
Good information.
Yeah, that's really helpful because, I think the way I took what you said is it's versus a static approach. It's more of a dynamic approach. And that's been something in my mind because, there's kind of two types of immunity that we've seen in infectious disease, where you have kind of a very comprehensive sterilizing immunity with like polio, diseases like that. And then you have the opposite spectrum with like flu, where you have this amazing genetic drift every year to where you have basically epidemics every year. And so I think COVID kind of falls somewhere in the spectrum there, but fortunately we do have a much more effective vaccine than what you see in flu annually. And so I think it's a good approach that in some ways, if you hear herd immunity, you kind of become almost complacent. And it's truly what you said. You have to keep your eyes on kind of the medical surveillance data feeds about cases, deaths, hospitalizations, and then variants. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, completely. I appreciate that as well. Great information. All right. Well, the last one we were going to talk about, and I'll kind of circle back to Dara and Autumn here, especially because we need to hit this from a communication perspective and making sure that everybody understands. But ladies, what would you say would be, knowing that everybody is not going to be appropriate for the vaccine, whether that be because of their personal medical condition, religious preference, whatever it may be, what are some of the things that we can be communicating that would help prevent the risk of infection for those that remain unvaccinated?
That's a great idea to talk about. And one of the things that Dr. Matos has said numerous times over the last year has been the Swiss cheese effect. And, if you keep stacking that Swiss cheese on top of each other, you're going to plug those holes as much as you can. At Axiom, we talk a lot about the layered approach. And so whether you're talking about the Swiss cheese layers or whether you're talking about other stacks upon stacks of layered approach, you do need to still think about that approach. So we still need to think about our environment and how to protect those within our work environments and our home environments. And that includes things like hygiene and testing and making sure there's still all of these measures in place to address infection in our spaces. So I want to reiterate that we see vaccinations as another layer in the approach, but not a single layer in the approach. We still need the other layers to protect ourselves and everybody in our environment. Autumn?
Yeah, am I muted?
No, you're good.
Okay. From a communication standpoint, there was just some polling done in the United States in March of this year and found that 42% of respondents believed at least one COVID-19 conspiracy theory. That's a lot of people. So we really need to debunk a lot of this and keep it in our constant stream of consciousness to just do our research and our due diligence, and also just to protect the vulnerable populations, the immune compromised, small children, women who are pregnant or recently pregnant, everyone from lung problems and asthma, COPD, diabetes, obesity. There's such a huge population that can't get vaccinated that we still need to consider them within this, get vaccinated ourselves if we're able, and continue on with good hygiene and social distancing and making sure that we're not involved, as exciting as it is, in big events and group events unless we're wearing a mask.
Yeah. Great points. Excellent. Anything that Dr. Matos or Dr. Cherry that you guys wanted to add there as well?
I think kind of what we were just speaking about earlier with herd immunity and how to look at it, and how Dara also mentioned our main focus has been this layered approach. We meet our clients to where they're resourced and so we have flexible ability to provide protection to employees depending on if they're willing to do testing, vaccination, screening, case management. And so early on in this pandemic, I thought there was going to be this silver bullet that would just kind of be this cure-all. And obviously that was overly optimistic, but I do want people to continue focusing on being as safe as they can be with this layered approach. I think it really is the best, safest way to move forward.
Yeah, great. Anything to add to that, Dr. Matos?
No, I think I agree. I think it's that multi-layered approach. And I think we still have to stay vigilant. I think, right now vaccines are winning against variants. And I think our vaccines are going to be really good and good. I think I'm optimistic, and I think they're going to hold for at least a year and a half, maybe even longer. So I think we're in a good spot, but I still think we have to keep our guard up. And, just as we've rolled back, is there a risk come fall? Maybe it's a 10% risk that we might have to, we've rolled forward, taking away masks and those other things. Is there a chance we might have to go backwards? I think it is. And I think a pandemic is dynamic. It's not fixed. So I think, keep your mind open, look at the data in front of you and respond to the data as quick as you can appropriately.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Excellent. Yeah. Well, panel, all of you, I appreciate you. I can't say enough how much I appreciate your willingness to kind of come on and provide that additional education. That's really kind of what our focus has been, is wanting to make for sure that we can get the right information out to the right people, and that we're giving factual information versus what you may see on social media or what's being, promoted through the news, et cetera. So I appreciate all of you. Any closing remarks before we wrap up here? Dr. Cherry, anything from you?
I usually have something saved up. Let me think on that. I'm trying to keep up my trend for Dara.
You can always go talk. You can talk about sleep for a couple of minutes,
That's
Dr.
right.
Cherry.
Yeah. That was it. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't actually. I think we've covered really a lot for COVID vaccine, or COVID in general. And so I think maybe something just popped in my mind about complacency. Something with regard to like high reliability organizations is that with so much intensity about whatever an organization or a person is focusing on, after a certain amount of time, you become very familiar and then ultimately complacent. And so there's kind of this cliche of complacency kills. And so I don't want it to be that dramatic, but I do want us to use that as a nudge to just remotivate ourselves to do, what's best for ourselves and our communities. So I'll probably rest on that.
Sounds good. Anything from you, Dr. Matos?
Yeah, I was just sitting here thinking, I think what I've been advising a lot of my clients is take the time to reflect on what worked for your organization during, the past year and what didn't. And, try to think of, what if there's a resurgence? How do I keep my business operating regardless of what COVID's doing? Is that, that Swiss cheese model of mask wearing, social distancing, testing, those type of things. So, being former military, kind of an after action report, right? You want to think through what worked for my organization and how do I keep myself, how do I keep me and my team going during the next pandemic or during the next COVID resurgence? So I think take this time to, catch your breath. I think we're going to have a really good summer in the US, and we'll see about fall. But I think take this time to really reflect on what's worked for you and your teams.
Yeah, great information. And Daryl, I'll go to you next, but maybe you want to mention also kind of the discussions that we've had about infection control and where, some of those initiatives may move in the near future and kind of taking advantage of that early on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think to Dr. Matos's point, we've been very reactive over the last year and a half. We've had to. So if we take this breath and we think about how to be proactive in the coming months, I do think it'll be important. And a lot of the customers and clients that we work with are thinking, as Dr. Matos said, what's coming next and how do we address infection in the workplace and prevent this from occurring and being caught off guard or being caught in a place where we didn't have plans in place. I think that'll be a critical component. And there are, even in addition to being best practice and being organizations that think proactively about this, we will have to address this from a regulatory standpoint. So there's going to potentially be regulation coming from OSHA or state regulated like Cal OSHA, and all of these are going to create an environment, as employers, that we have to pay attention to infection in the workplace and what we do next. So take the time, as Dr. Matos said, take the breath and take the opportunity to think about what's next.
Good points. Autumn, how about you?
Oh, I have something about this. I would definitely focus on taking that breath, outdoors, play outside, get as much sunshine and exercise as you can. We all need vitamin D. That's a natural immune booster. Eat as clean as you can. Reduce your caffeine. Get your good rest. And also take good care of each other. Check in on your neighbors. Focus on your own mental and behavioral health. Meditate. Do all the good things that you know are going to boost your immunity and the people around you, because that stuff's more contagious, right?
That's right. Absolutely. Awesome. Great information, guys. Just real quickly before we finally wrap up here, I did want to just kind of bring this up again, that if you're looking for answers on how it is that you could roll out or develop a workplace vaccination process, we do have a white paper that's on our website. We've had the opportunity to actually put multiple events together and all over the country, and it's really kind of been an honor for us to participate in that and be able to expand our reach and touch the others that are there. So if you have any questions about what that would look like or some initiatives that you could take, there's some great information in there. Obviously, we're always available to chat with you about what vaccines would look like, or the side piece of just kind of tracking that and what that would look like for a third party that could keep that information safe, just kind of track those employees that definitely have had the vaccine and those that still may be lacking. So anything it is that we can do or be of assistance with, please don't hesitate to reach out. Final note is, again, don't forget about the webinar on Thursday. If you haven't already, please select that registration link and get registered. We're excited to have you. I think it's going to be some great information. It's a horrible topic. We always hate anything that is of this nature, but at the same time, it's such a gift to be able to think about these things in advance and protect the lives of others. So unless anybody has anything else, we will go ahead and call it a day. And I appreciate you joining, and we will see you then on Thursday.